You're on mute.
Thank you. I'm Altheria Caldera. Welcome and thank you for being here. Our session is divided into 3 different presentations, all with the focus of the title, which is Literacy and Social Justice. I'm Altheria Caldera, and I'll present to you first, and I'll pass it on to our co-presenter, Mo Thomas, and she will pass it on to Christopher Stewart. Thank you all so much for your being here, and we anticipate an interesting, engaging conversation for the last 15 minutes of our time together. The title of my session is From Philosophy to Practice, Thinking Deeply About Children's Book Selections. I'm an assistant professor of reading and language arts at Howard University. I'm also the director of the DC Area Writing Project. I'm new here to the DMV area in my first year at Howard and my first 7 months here in the DMV. So the purpose of my session today is to help you to think more deeply about your philosophy of education. Usually this is an assignment that teachers have pre-service teachers to do in like a social foundations course. In the pre-service training, perhaps you were asked to write your philosophy of education. So I want to circle back to that now that most of you are probably in the classroom practicing as teachers. But not only are we going to look at your philosophy of education, but we're going to think a little bit about how your philosophy shapes your selection of children's books, of teaching materials, specifically children's books. So many of the national debates that we see surrounding education right now are actually debates about philosophy. In other words, we're seeing heated conversations, and there's considerable debate about what is the purpose of schooling and what kind of materials should teachers use in the classroom. Some of these philosophical debates are seen here on the screen. Should climate change be taught in schools? Parents and teachers think so. These are all headlines that have been in the news over the last 6 months or so. Teachers are divided on teaching LGBT topics. And you see the last 2 here, and one that I recently found, this patriotic education. Is it a pride or is it a problem? So you might have seen just recently a story about teachers and activists in Georgia who are having a debate about whether to use a graphic novel that has a rape scene in it. And parents and these activists are saying they don't want their children reading about rape, whereas teachers are saying this is the opportunity to teach students about consent, informed consent. And so there's an argument there. And perhaps you saw this one just yesterday, and I want to show you a clip of Senator Cruz questioning Judge Brown Jackson about children's books just on yesterday. So let me get out of here just to show you a brief clip of this on yesterday.
They include a book called Antiracist Baby by Ibram Kendi. And there are portions of this book that I find really quite remarkable. One portion of the book says babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There is no neutrality. Another portion of the book, they recommend to babies confess when being racist. Now, this is a book that is taught at Georgetown Day School to students in pre-K through 2nd grade, so 4 through 7 years old. Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Senator, I do not believe that any child should be made to feel as though they are racist or though they are not valued or though they are less than, that they are victims, that they are oppressors. I don't believe in any of that. But what I will say is that when you asked me whether or not this was taught in schools, critical race theory, my understanding is that critical race theory as an academic theory is taught in law schools. And to the extent that you were asking the question, I understood you to be addressing public schools.
So I just wanted to show you that brief clip, this conversation that we're talking about today. What kind of instructional materials are used in schools, and what books are made available to students? I have here too, in my personal library, that have been the subject of considerable debate. Ibram X. Kendi, Stamped from the Beginning for Children. This is the elementary version of his adult book, Stamped from the Beginning. And here's another one that has been the center of considerable debate. This one is Born on the Water, the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones. And these are books that I encourage my pre-service teachers to include in their classroom libraries. I'm teaching a course this semester on children's literature. And so we've been having these kinds of conversations in our classroom about what kind of books they'll select and why. Proponents of bills, such as one in Texas that requires parents say that they deserve the transparency. So there's a bill that says that teachers should put all of their instructional materials online so that parents can know what their students are being taught, as if teachers are engaging in some covert practices to convert students to a certain way of thinking. So I want to go to a Zoom poll very quickly, and I ask you to fill in 3 sentence starters. The first one is here, the purpose of school. And you have in the Zoom chat, in the Zoom poll, 4 different reasons behind the purpose for schooling. And I'd like you to select the one that you feel best aligns with your philosophy. Is it to prepare students to dissent, disrupt, and dismantle oppressive systems, to transmit social values and norms, help students develop foundational knowledge and skills, or something else? And you might have several of these that align with your philosophy, but choose one that most align. And because you chose to attend a session on social justice and literacy, I kind of can predict where some of these answers are going to go. And I see here that 40% of you says that the purpose of schooling is to prepare students to dissent, disrupt, and dismantle oppressive systems. But the majority of you said that the purpose of schooling is to prepare students with foundational knowledge and skills. More than 70% of you said that one. So think about the second question then. Students should be able to. What should students be able to do as a result of schooling? Think critically about societal problems, conform to societal expectations. That's why we have school rules, right? School rules that replicate societal rules, and consequences, exclusionary consequences for breaking those rules. Don't we want students to conform to these expectations, or do we? To read, write, and compute, or something else? The majority of you all said that you think students should be able to think critically about societal problems. Well, if you feel that way, you probably are in opposition to some of these people who say that Students should not be grappling with what they consider to be divisive issues in schools, right? And the last one, the role of the teacher is to equip students with the skills needed to transform society, to help students become responsible citizens, ensure that students have the knowledge and skills necessary for college and careers, or something else. The majority of you said your role as a teacher is to equip students with the skills needed to transform society. As I said earlier, that's not surprising to me for teachers who are interested in social justice and education. So thank you all for participating in that poll. I really appreciate seeing what those results are. Now, I'll share with you a little bit about my philosophy of education. And just if you want to read more about it, it is found in this article published in November 2018 called Woke Pedagogy, a framework for teaching and learning. And if you just type that in, you can go right to the website and download a PDF. No access to databases required. So here's what I believe. I believe that the purpose of education is to prepare students to enact positive societal change by critically examining socio-political issues. I believe that students should be able to think critically, relate to others empathetically, and envision a just society. And the teacher's role is to facilitate difficult conversations about injustice and inequities. So here's a sentence starter, and I fill this one in, but I want you to think about how you would fill this one in, because I'll ask you to go to the chat and do so. Because I believe, ... I select children's books that ... As an example, because I believe that students should learn to relate to others with empathy and understanding, I include children's books that reflect diverse lived experiences. So I'll give you 1 minute now to go to the chat and just fill in those ... with what you believe to be, to finish it saying what you believe. And because you believe this, these are the books that you select. These are the kind of children's books that are in your classroom. And just like we allow students wait time in the classroom, I believe in giving participants wait time as well. And if you're thinking about what do you believe, that is the purpose of us having this part of the session today. Because my contention is that teachers really need to think about what they believe about the purpose of education and how those beliefs show up in their selection of children's books. And there are a couple of people who have answered in the chat. Brian says, because I believe children should be free to explore their interests, I select all kinds of books. Even if those books are controversial, Brian. Carla says that learning should be fun. I chose books that include stories that are animated and engaging. Because I believe, this is Dijon Tucker, because I believe that students are more engaged when they can identify with text, I select children's books that mirror their reality. Yes. Thank you all for sharing in the chat. So why is it important for teachers, especially ELAR teachers, to think about their beliefs and how their beliefs shape their choices in teaching materials? 3 reasons. Number 1, it helps teachers to understand the reasons behind their pedagogical choices. You'll know, you might find yourself making teaching decisions and you wonder why you're making those decisions. Well, when you've thought significantly about your philosophy of education, you're able to make those connections. It allows teachers to work with intentionality so that you're deliberate in your selection of children's books, and you're not just putting any book that's given to you in your classroom library, or any book that catches your attention. It helps you be intentional about your selection of children's books. And it enables teachers to communicate their goals effectively with stakeholders, such as parents. If a parent is questioning you about a book selection that's in your library, you can explain to that parent why that book is there, because you have thought deeply about your philosophy of education. Just a few weeks ago, maybe you all saw this story. In Mississippi, assistant principal was fired for reading a story called "I Need a New Butt" to children. And so these are the kind of things we want to, and not that this is a bad book, but when you are intentional about selecting your book, you're able to say to parents and to administrators, this is why I have this book in my classroom, because I believe X, Y, and Z. So in summary, children's books can be powerful tools to help social justice-oriented teachers achieve their goals. Selections should be deliberate and reflective of teachers' philosophy of education, and teachers who have thought deeply about the connections between their philosophy and their classroom libraries are able to justify their decisions to stakeholders. In closing, an educator in a system of oppression is either a revolutionary or an oppressor. This is a quote by Lerone Bennett Jr. in The Challenge of Blackness. And so a question I want to leave you with is your children's library revolutionary or oppressive? Thank you for your time. Here is my contact information for anyone who'd like to reach out to me personally, but we also have allotted time at the end for questions and comments. Now I'll pass things over to my co-presenter, Mo Williams.
Thank you, Altheria. My name is Mo Thomas, clinical faculty member at Urban Teachers and Johns Hopkins. I have been doing this work for several years in the district. I taught in a district school for 10 years. And so literacy is my main house, but I also live in the House of Special Education and Race, Culture, Equity, and Inclusion and Diversity and Anti-Racist Educators. Those are the courses that I teach through our program. And today, Altheria has left me in the perfect spot because we've been talking about our pedagogy as educators. And I use the term educators broadly, not loosely, but broadly, because I believe that we are empowering educators in multiple spaces. In the K-12 classroom, in our intervention spaces, I'm a reading specialist as well. So I know that in that one-on-one space, but also in the front office. We are impacting instruction. We are changing minds. And in Aussie, we're doing the same. And it's with some of our partners that have joined us, educational partners throughout the district. So everyone in here is an educator, and we want to empower you with this work and this charge to move forward, that we feel this pedagogy and we are infusing it into the way that we instruct. Today, I'm not going to be talking about specific programs, but we're going to be talking about the way that we approach this work. Before we do that, I'm going to go back to the last slide, Altheria. Before we do that, I'm going to wear you guys out in the chat, the previous slide. Thank you. And I want to start us off by diving into what we think right now. When I say liberating, what comes to mind? And I'm going to ask you to type that in the chat. And I'm going to ask you to do me a solid and type it in capital letters, because we are starting this off with empowerment. So what comes to your mind when I say liberate or liberation? And it can be something that you've seen off of this slide because we've held it up here for a while, or it can become something off, oh, I love it, off the top of your head. Freedom. A lot of you said freedom. Yes. What else do we think of with liberation? Removing the shackles, say less. Blackness, beautiful, beautiful. All of these things should come to mind when we think about liberating, transparency, full human capacity, choice. You guys have started us off with a complete empowerment, and I put the fist up there intentionally because, again, this is a movement, this is a charge, and we're moving forward in this work. No shame, I like that. Thank you. Thank you for all of that empowerment, educators. Next slide. So what does this look like in our classrooms? Well, before we can talk about that, we need to talk about all of these beautiful things that have uplifted us, but we have to recognize what oppresses us and brings us down. So before we talk about how we can show up in the classroom, we need to acknowledge the systems of oppression that hold us back. And because you're in this system, in this session, excuse me, I'm gonna assume, oh, I'm sorry, we'll go back again. I'll assume that you are here as a result of understanding that oppressive system, and that is education. The system itself was never created for everyone. We must acknowledge that, and we must use that to channel the ways that we liberate ourselves from that oppression. So with that being said, in that mindset and framework, there are three ways that we're going to talk about that today. We're going to tap into the funds of knowledge of our students. We're going to make our curriculum a little bit spicier. And in doing so, we're going to talk about critical literacy and taking a critical stance. Next slide, please. When I say tapping into their funds of knowledge, I will continuously use a lot of analogies in here, so just bear with me. But I am a tapper. Those are actually my tap shoes on the floor. And when I think about how I start off my tap routines, I warm myself up. I have to do a little something to get it started. And tap dancers, we like to hear the sound. We like to hear that tap. But we have to keep coming back to the same movements and building on those movements every time. But it's because we enjoy hearing back from the floor, hearing that rhythm. And so when I think about tapping, I think about I made the analogy to tapping into our students' funds of knowledge. We need to tap back into the source of whom we serve, and that is our students. We need to go back to them and tap into their funds of knowledge. A lot of times we, as educators, come straightforward and we're ready to empower with information, but I'm asking us to take a step back first and figure out what our students know. What is their prior knowledge to this? What do they already know? Just because it shows up in the third grade curriculum doesn't mean that it hasn't shown up somewhere else, doesn't mean that somebody doesn't already know this information. We need to tap back into the source of our students and find out where they are, what they think. I tapped into your funds of knowledge before we even began. I asked you what your ideas were on liberation, so that we came to this work with a common ground and an understanding. We also need to look at what their real life lived experiences are. When we talk about the skills that we're about to teach, we also need to think about where they show up in real life. It may be that a student has come to us with a lived experience that utilizes this skill, but may not look like what our curriculum looks like or what the textbook looks like. And so we need to give space for that real life story and make connections with it. Remember, this story is based in our systemic framework of oppression within education. So those stories may not always be positive. We need to give space to the counter narrative. Despite what we believe, there may be a different side of that. And we need to give space to those stories. Sometimes children's personal stories have been excluded from our instructional pieces, but we need to tap into that. We need to give space to that. We need to elevate that. We need to validate that, because that is the place that they come from. Another place where we can tap into their funds of knowledge is identifying their cultural capital. Yoso wrote an article in 2009 that talks about the value of some of the things that we have in our culture that are just as important, if not more important, than some of the material things that we value. And so tapping into that cultural space for our students, whether it be their familial capital, they may have a great relationship with their family, the social capital that they bring. We might be real good with our friends. Identifying what it is that is important to them and building off of that is also a way to tap into their funds of knowledge, to see what they know. Just in the morning session, they were talking about how listening to students have conversation builds on the instructional experiences that you can have with them. So really tapping into those funds of knowledge is important, tapping back into our students. Next slide, please. Another way to think about doing something and being liberatory in our literacy instruction is making it a little spicier. I'm going to switch my analogies now and talk about food. It is past lunchtime. I hope everybody got their bellies full. But I like to call myself a cook. Now, my husband may disagree, but we just gonna keep it like that. And I'd like to say that I'm a bit of a Southern girl in that aspect. And I will say that I don't always necessarily follow the recipe. I'm just gonna admit it. And sometimes I may follow the recipe, but I think it needs a little bit more flavor. The goal is to enhance the natural flavors of what's already there. So I might add a little bit more spice. I'm one of those people that says that they like to cook to taste. So I constantly am tasting what it is. By the time I'm done, I'm not hungry anymore, but I am tasting it to elevate the flavors that are already there. Spicier is actually an acronym that stands for social justice, purpose, intention, criticality and inquiry, engagement and relevance. I'm gonna say that one more time. Social justice, purpose, intention, criticality and inquiry, engagement and relevance that we are adding to our current curriculum. Next slide, please. So let's start talking with social justice. Oop, we skipped a slide. I'm gonna go back and talk about social justice education. There we go. And I love this quote by Bell, because Bell talks about social justice education as both a process and a goal. The goal of social justice education is the full and equal participation of all groups in society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs. So if we think about that both as a goal and a process, in our instruction, it should be open for everyone to have equal participation in the learning. But it's also a goal that by the end of our learning experience and our educational experiences have been socially just. I heard someone this morning talk and say the very thing that reading is social justice. It's the civil right. So giving this instructional opportunity of the highest caliber is what social justice education is all about. Bacauer talks about it in her article, 6 Elements of Social Justice Curriculum Design for Elementary Classrooms. I believe it's for any classroom because I know that I have used these outside of the elementary framework. But if you look at these elements, self-love and knowledge, respect for others, this is inclusive education. That sounds a lot like SEL to me. So you're saying that SEL should be a part of our literacy? Absolutely. Element 3, issues of social injustice. Just as out there spoke about, we're not shying away from these conversations. We're giving students materials where they can have this information in front of them and we can have those conversations. When we talk about when do students really figure out what race is? At 3. At 3, they're able to distinguish those differences and they don't have words for them. So let's give them the conversation. Let's give them the words. Let's use the materials and the texts that speak of these injustices and let's have conversations. Element 4, movements and social justice and social change. Children are responsible for most of the movements in our society. Malala, Colette Coven, couldn't say that. But those are children inspired by understanding. Social movements for social change and awareness rising. And my favorite one is social action. This isn't all just talk. We're doing something about it. And so our instruction, our information for students should be about what can we do with this? How can we use this? How can we change? You all said that you wanted instruction and your purpose for teaching was about having students transform society. This is how, by providing social action. Next slide, please. So I'm going to show you this image that I'm sure we've all at some point seen a portion of, maybe not this particular version, but I want you to do me a solid right now and type in the chat, which of these is social justice? Which of these is social justice? And while you're doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the image that we see in front of us. So I'm going to start with reality. So if we're already thinking in that framework of, we know that there's an oppressive system, we know that that is instruction, education, excuse me, we know that there have been groups that have been marginalized, like my young child here in the purple shirt. That's their reality. They have been marginalized. They've been given less than an opportunity. While some students have been privileged beyond that, and the opportunities that they've been given have elevated them so that we can't even see what color t-shirt they have on. But when we look at equality, everybody got a box. We've done our due diligence across the board, right? But what about that child in the blue t-shirt whose reality wasn't even on the ground? So sure, they've been elevated beyond their current circumstance, but have they been elevated to the point where the learning or the opportunity has been given to them? That one box, they still can't see over the fence. For those of you that responded, ooh, picture 2, okay, I see picture 2 in liberation, thank you. All of the above, I love it. Equity gives that student the opportunity, one more box so that they are able to see over the fence. But here's the beauty. Liberation, also social justice. That's what we're striving for because we've taken the barrier away to the instruction. Next slide. So with liberation in mind, here are some ways that we can liberate our instruction. Purpose and intentionality. The why. We always ask why. We always want to know what's going on. So giving your students that why can be simply done by switching up your daily objective. Instead of saying today we will or students will be able to, add the next part so that we can give them a purpose and intentionality for their learning. Long-term objectives. Instead of it just being about a skill, what are we going to do with that skill? What are we going to build with that skill? We want to create. We want to evaluate something, or we want to determine something to prove or solve a problem. Again, thinking with that social justice framework of action at the end, or we want to inquire about something. What questions do we have? Next slide, please. Which leads me to one of my favorite areas, criticality. We want to question, we want to inquire. We want students to make decisions, to think together, to work in groups, to challenge current ideas, to be inspired, to brainstorm. We want to push students to higher order thinking. I use the Bloom's taxonomy in this slide because I know that when we go for those skills, we often do remembering and understanding. But I'm challenging us to move further up the cognitive domain by thinking about how we apply that skill and what students can create with that skill. These quotes at the bottom of this slide are from my favorite, Goldie Muhammad. If you don't have the book, get it. Cultivating Genius. Goldie Muhammad takes the framework of understanding the Black literary societies of the early 1900s and the framework of learning and gathering literacy information from literacy, and uses that to think about the ways that we instruct students. These quotes from 2 different works both talk about the fact that criticality gives capacity, of course, to read, write, and think, but that reading, writing, and thinking elevates us to a level of understanding the power, privilege, social justice, and oppression within our world, especially for those who have been historically marginalized. Giving everybody the opportunity is an imperative for our instruction. Criticality is also foundational for our love and our understanding of text. So as we continue to move forward, next slide, we want to think about ways that we can incorporate that criticality into our learning. Paulo Freire is another one of my favorites. I pay homage to the old heads all the time. And his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this is my favorite quote. Reading from a critical stance requires not reading and understanding words, but reading the world. Why do we need to read the world? Because so that we won't be manipulated by it. Students need to go beyond just being able to read the text, but being able to read the world gives them the opportunities, levels the playing field, is social justice. allows them to transform our society. Next slide, please. So how can we do that with our instruction? This is a list of 10 sets of questions. This is not exclusive, like you can't just not ask these questions or only ask these questions, but these are 10 critical question sets. And I say sets of questions because some of them have follow-up questions. Take a look at this list. You may have other ones that you're thinking of. This comes from a compilation of several different places. But I think about asking questions as a part of giving opportunity for criticality. And why is a great follow-up question to any of these, to get into deeper understanding. But as you look and see which ones you may or may not be able to use in your space, I'm going to highlight number 3, because I asked this question of students of all ages. Tell me who's telling the story. The idea that there is one voice that is being heard in this text. Now, I hope that this is not news to you, but I'm going to say it. There is no neutrality in storytelling or even reporting. Everybody has a perspective. Everybody may even have a bias that they bring to it. When we talk about author's purpose is always on purpose. They're doing things within the text to get you to feel or think a certain way, to persuade, to inform, or entertain you by the use of their words, by the structure of their text. So we want to make sure that we allow students that space to recognize, to critically recognize where this information is coming from. Who's telling the story? What other perspectives are there in this story? Do any of these stories challenge each other? And whose voice is missing? It is important that we allow for criticality within our work. Next slide. A challenge is sometimes what's engaging to students. Now, I don't know if you understand Kid President, that's who's in that corner. Kid President is the bomb. Now, he's a whole grown man now. But these videos, my students of all ages love them. They've always got a social emotional understanding, or he engages us in thinking beyond our teenage minds or our elementary minds. But I think about him as a way of engaging. Who would have thought I could engage 14-year-olds in the beginning of their day with Kid President? But I think about the ways that we engage our students. And I think oftentimes we think, oh, engaging has to be fun. And I use fun in air quotes because I think a lot of times we think, oh, gamification, that's what's going to be fun. And what really is happening is we're challenging students. We can gamify sometimes, sure, but that's not the only way to engage them. Think about the things that have already worked for your students. What do they really like? Also think about your own experiences. I always say, go back to your best learning ever. When was that moment in your life where you were experiencing like the best learning? You remember it, it sticks in your mind to this day. I can tell you mine was 7th grade science. I loved it because we dissected everything. I mean, frogs, cows, ears, everything. And when we think about that moment, I go back to it because I'm like, it was hands-on. Our teacher tapped into the thing that was fun for us. By the time I got to AP Bio in 10th grade, I had done all the things. I was a rock star. So the challenge was there as well. Think about all of the things that you can do to engage your students, but make sure that it is connected to your objectives and your standards and to the conceptual understanding that you want them to take away from whatever it is you're doing. And lastly, next slide, is relevance. If we compile all these things, social justice, criticality, inquiry, engagement, purpose, and intentionality, it comes out in the relevancy of the tasks that we put before our students. What are we asking students to do with the information that we're giving them? And here are a couple of examples across the board, all of which are relevant. Some are more relevant than others. And I will name that not all of these are literacy examples. But however, if you read through some of them, you'll recognize that there's a level of relevance when we change the names of people and the names of objects in our tasks. But there's more relevance and criticality when we make these learning opportunities authentic, when we give them purpose and action at the end, and we cater to the things that are most important to them. building on those cultural capitals. As you look at that, I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm sorry. Now that you've looked at that, excuse me, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I want you to do me the last solid in the chat to think about one of the ways that we've talked about, one of the things that you've captured from this moment that can allow you to be more liberatory in your practices. What is one thing that you've heard, seen, we've talked about that can allow you to be more liberatory in your literacy practices? Go ahead and type that idea in the chat. I want to thank you so much for your participation, and I appreciate all of your work. You've been working it out in the chat. Last slide. And there's my information. Again, thank you so very much, and we'll be available at the end for questions. And now I'm going to pass this on to my colleague, Christopher, who is going to talk to you about eliminating book apartheid. Christopher.
Well, hello, everyone. Hi, I should have gone first. So you're telling me I have to follow these queens? I should have gone first. It's so good to be here and to be a part of this this discussion and this liberation experience. So ending the book Apartheid and re-examining literary spaces. My name is Christopher Stewart. I am a senior librarian and cluster lead with the District of Columbia Public Schools where I serve, and where I serve some incredible students. And I'm gonna first go into these two quotes, one by Rosa Parks and one by Barbara Jordan. I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away with fear. Just think on that just a little bit. And then Barbara Jordan, we the people. It is a very eloquent beginning, but when the document was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out, but by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in we the people. Next slide, please. So when we think about the people, when we think about those who have been left out, whether it be poverty, whether it be through book apartheid, and we're going to get into that, we have to make sure that they are included. In the District of Columbia, 1 in 4 residents are below level 1 reading literacy, and 1 in 3 residents are below level 1 math literacy. A book desert is a geographical area where reading materials and literary engagement is difficult or cumbersome to obtain, a term that was coined by Unite for Literacy. Now, book apartheid is the intentional and systemic treatment of forsaking neighborhoods and communities and preventing them from being able to access literary resources, including bookstores, libraries, and technological advances. This particular term was coined by me. In Ward 7, we have 4 DC public libraries, and in Ward 8, we have 3. Their collections are not as robust as libraries in more affluent areas of the city. How many bookstores do we have east of the river? If you can place that in the chat, let's spend about a minute on that. How many bookstores do you think we have east of the river? And you all are all on technology, as I tell my students. Y'all can look it up if you like, but try to guess. I see 1, I see a lot of 1s, I see 2. It may be a little difficult question because I think I know which one most people are thinking of, which is definitely the most popular one. And they just opened another store at National Harbor. Yes, it does, Dwight, absolutely. Busboys and Poets counts. Yes, standalone or included in. Okay, you all are doing great, doing great. Yeah, standalone. Yeah, or it can be busboys. That's right, Chloe. Okay, so when we think about, so I'm going to give you all the answer. It's three, right? It's probably maybe a little bit more, depending upon if you have small libraries within centers, community centers, but there are three that are known, and these are Mahogany Bookstore, Charnice Milton Community Bookstore, which operates out of We Act radio station, and Busboys and Poets, right? So east of the river in Ward 7 and 8, as you can see in the mapping, has the largest percentage of poverty. Ward 7, 27.7%, Ward 8, 36.8%. This is not by happenstance, let me tell you. Urban renewal pushed nearly 23,000 Black residents from Southwest into Southeast and Maryland bordering DC. The alleged goal was to revitalize and redevelop, right? That was what was said. The outcome was displacement. The city responded to the mid-century displacement by building public housing units, not creating employment opportunities. By the end of the 1960s, most of the city's public housing residents now resided east of the river. So this wasn't something that was happening in the 17 and 1800s, and this was mid-century 1900. When my great-grandparents moved to Anacostia in the 1960s, they had white neighbors with a sprinkling of Black ones, and they moved from North Carolina. But after Bolling Air Force Base accessed a large portion of its workforce and the 1954 Supreme Court case Bolling versus Sharp, which legally ended public school segregation and caused many white workers to leave Southeast and Southwest in what we would now call white flight. Whites leaving urban neighborhoods for the suburbs due to our increasing minority population. By the 1970s, though, east of the river was 85% Black. A 1971 lawsuit, Berner versus Washington, filed by a diverse group of residents, outlined a marked inequality between the predominantly low-income Black population east of the river and the predominantly upper-income, 98% white population living west of Rock Creek Park, arguing that the divide had been willfully created by the city and federal governments through policy, public policy that is, which you all are familiar with, redlining. It's a huge one, and substandard services. The residents requested that the U.S. District Court order public officials to draw up a comprehensive plan to improve the inferior status of the area. This was unsuccessful in the courts, but it highlighted the systemic racism and hatred that Blacks face from housing, healthcare, unemployment to education. Slide 2, please. So definitely our eyes wide open. Literacy and income are married. Due to race and gender-based discrimination, Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC earn incomes that are not comparable to their white counterparts, regardless of educational levels and work experience, read 2020. So the racial wealth gap, according to the survey of Consumer Finance Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, for every dollar of wealth held by a typical white household, the typical Black household holds how much, do you all think? Place that in the chat for me. So for every dollar held by a white household, the typical Black household holds how much? I see 70 cents. I see, is that $1? 60%, 65 cents, 50 cents. $1, 50 to 75 cents, 45 cents. Yeah, these are good. 35 to 40 cents. This is good. So I'm going to give you all the answer. 55 cents. The typical Black household holds how much wealth? 6 cents. For every dollar that a white household holds, Black household holds 6 cents. I think we have become so DC-fied. You know, our salaries, you know, are very different in Washington, DC than in other places of the country. So that I think we're a little spoiled sometimes, right? 6 cents. So wealth is generational. We know that. You pass it down, you have insurance policies. Wealth left over generation compounds and it grows. But when you are generationally being paid significantly less for the same, if not more experience in education, and some, if not all of your ancestors built a nation, but were not compensated, were enslaved, and were legally forbidden to read and write, you see the marriage between literacy, poverty, and racism. Slide 3, please. So what do we do, right? So what do we do when we are confronted with illiteracy rates, social justice, and poverty? So in the top right-hand corner, you will see a food pantry. That's actually at my school. I am the librarian, proud librarian at Columbia Heights Education Campus, where I have a number of students who are experiencing homelessness and poverty. This is not new to cities and states and municipalities, but I knew I had to do something. We had to do something to make sure that students, when they left here, after receiving free or reduced lunch, that when they went home, that they had some snacks, that they had some food. And also making sure that we get that message out to their parents, because it is a full and whole family support, not just the student, right? When the student feels loved and supported, when the family rather feels loved and supported, then the student does as well. At the bottom left, that is one of the houses I own in Anacostia. So a lot of my family moved out in the 1980s and 90s with the crack and drug epidemic, moved to Maryland. Right out of college, I knew that I needed to be back in Anacostia, back in DC, and particularly Anacostia. So since 2018, I have been housing a family that has been experiencing, or families that have been experiencing homelessness, poverty. That is something that I feel called to do, right? Something that I make sure that I can do to guarantee that I am stopping to end poverty. There's a little free library right out front, right? So not only can this mom, the single mom, who has now been able to take classes at UDC for free, she also, one of her children goes to a DC public school, and they have been able to give great, they've been able to be wrapped in loving arms because they know that they have a safe place to live. And they also know that their mom is not stressed. So it truly is a wraparound thing when you look at illiteracy rates and you look at poverty, making sure that we take care of both. It's so imperative. Next slide, please. So these are some of the things that, I'm not alone in this. So many are doing this work. We have Ms. Shaw with DC Public Schools. She's visiting families and homes to make sure that students have not only educational resources, but other resources, and giving students and parents access to those resources. Dr. McWhorter at the Library of Congress, she's actually did a project where she handed strangers money for food and housing and medication, no strings attached. She didn't know them. She just decided to go out on the street and do this work as a project that she felt compelled to do. DC Public Libraries, DC Public School librarians, and also DC Public Library, resume and employment classes for families, educational and housing resources, very important. Again, this wraparound family support. Next slide, please. So this is a meditation moment when we talk about this full and home family support for each child, parent, guardian, and community member. Now, as I, for me, making sure that I am housing individuals, because how can you continue to learn and feel loved and go out into the world and thrive when you don't have any place to lay your head except for possibly a shelter bed or a bench park? So for me, that is my call, right? In North Carolina, I'm doing the same thing with a family. I picked up a second job, Uber, and I am working that thing, okay? To make sure that I'm doing my human goal of loving on humanity. But if you can close your eyes for just 1 second, I want you to imagine a world where public, charter, and independent schools have developed cluster supports per neighborhood and community ward to provide full and whole literacy and poverty intervention, resources in partnership with DC government and federal agencies, as well as NGOs. daily virtual and in-person literary tutoring for the whole family, fresh produce and healthy food drop-offs and pickups for the whole family, employment opportunities with living wages, minimum $25 an hour, with free opportunities to receive your associate's and bachelor's degrees in collaboration with local universities and colleges for the whole family. We have Georgetown, GW, Howard, Trinity, Catholic. It's no excuse. Their endowments are millions and millions of dollars. We can give free education, of course, UDC. Mental and emotional care supports for the whole family right at the school level, not just for the students. Resources required, of course. Rapid, immediate housing, non-shelter, 24-hour turnaround for the whole family. More bookstores and collection developments from public libraries in all libraries across all 8 wards and all over our country and nation and world. Please open your eyes. We have piecemealed this experience. DC and other nation states, they're doing a little bit of this work here and there. We have a fiduciary responsibility to go out and to be a unified city, nation, and world. We have an opportunity to intentionally and compassionately alter the lives of current and future generations with access, love, and care. For our students are watching us, and what they see will dictate what they do in the future. Next slide, please. These are just a few resources, and please make sure that you, next slide, I'm sorry. Reach out to me, Christopher Pax on all platforms, and that is my email address. If you have any questions whatsoever, I know I shaved, right? And it's funny, the picture there, all that hair, and then I don't have any now. But yes, thank you so much, and we look forward to your questions.
So yes, we'll open it up for questions. If anyone wants to come off mute, you raise your hand and one of our facilitators will take you off mute.
I was able to go ahead and take that permission off, so you should be able to unmute yourselves.
Brian, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. It's sort of a comment and a question. Now, there's a lot of talk about, racist structures and oppressive structures. And we do all of this work of attempting to reform and to fix these institutions that we've identified as being fundamentally not built for our students, the students that we serve. Yet we spend all this time trying to fix them, trying to adapt them, trying to reform them, trying to come up with strategies and methods to make them work for our youth. Would our time be better spent just getting rid of these systems and building new ones? Making it, I've been working in public education for 4 decades, and we do these wonderful things and we get incremental change. We get incremental growth at best. But if we really want some real change, we need to just destroy this thing completely and build something totally new that's built for everybody, not just for one group of people to do one specific thing for that group of people, which in an essence of itself, the American education system wasn't built to liberate anybody. So, I'm just, that's just where I am at this point, And so that's sort of like my question comment. Should we just build something new? And just get rid of this thing, because it ain't working and it's not getting much better.
Your question gets at the heart of critical race theory as espoused by Derek Bell. Derek Bell said that racism is so built into the system that it's permanent in the current system as it is. And some people, of course, disagree with that aspect of critical race theory. But he says that there is a permanent fixture, that racism is a permanent fixture, and that we need to do exactly what you just said, destroy this system and build a new one. And I can't say that I disagree with that. I just want to know, what does that look like? Even when I think about prison abolition, if we destroy, if we just get rid of the prison system as we know it, what does that society look like? I'd love for someone to help me think through that.
I can help you.
And not necessarily the prison thing right now, because I know that's
No,
not our
I'm talking
topic.
about schools. I can
Yeah.
help you.
Yeah, what does that look like?
Well, one thing it looks like is a whole lot more caring adults with a whole lot less young people. The history of, and believe me, I have no silver bullets. It's an extremely complex challenge, and it requires an extremely complex solution, and there's no one silver bullet that's going to fix everything. But one place we can start is with smaller numbers of adults working with smaller numbers of youth, so that we could really do all these wonderful things that we want to do with these systems that we have in place, so that we can really target, thank you, so that we can really target the students where they are and address the challenges that they face on a much more individualized basis. Me as a teacher, I can keep track much better of 10 or 15 things than I can of 120. So that's one place we can start, right, with that. That's one way that it might look. More adults with less children.
Thank you. We're almost at our time. Well, we're actually over time. We're at 4:33. But we thank you all for being here. We thank you for your engagement. We would love to be able to continue the conversation. We had hoped to have more time for conversation, but you know, we were talkers. And so we thank you for being here. Please follow up with either one of us or all of us if you want to continue the conversation. We welcome it. We don't get a chance to have these kind of conversations and this dialogue enough. So we welcome you to follow up with us, and maybe we'll just schedule a session that is not OSCE related and just get together and talk about these issues. Anything else, co-presenters, before we go?
No, thank you all so very much for engaging in the conversation and being a think tank. Brian, I'm waiting for you to start the think tank that continues this work beyond exactly what you just said, beyond this conversation. Thank you all so much. Christopher?
Yes, thank you. This has truly been just incredible to be engaged with you all, co-presenters, but also every single one of you all that came to this session. Just thank you. And I know you all are doing some incredible work, and put it out there, you know, so others can be inspired by the work that you're doing in your school and your community. And let's just continue to hold and lift up families and love on them so much. And I love you all.
And thank you to our wonderful presenters. This was truly engaging. I saw lots of comments, a great way to end the day. And it truly was very inspiring, uplifting. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to all of our participants. Please take the survey. It's in the chat. We'll also have this recording posted on our OSCE website by the end of the week. So if you want to come back and revisit this presentation, but also we will make sure your contacts are shared. Any last comments? All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye. Take care.